Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Okay. So welcome everyone to this our monthly Q&A. I have a list of questions, so as is my habit, I will go through these questions first. And then if there are any other additional questions, please you use the chat function to bring them. The first question is Katb al-Kitab considered a nikah? If so, is it followed by a second nikah with a written contract? Please expound, etc. Also, if this practice is based on the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, could you expand on the historical reference? Marriage in Islam is governed by contract law, because marriage is a contract. It is an offer for marriage based on certain conditions and accepting that offer. So as long as there is the offer, as long as there are the witnesses, as long as there is the guardian, the wali, as long as there is the mahr, of course, there are different opinions about each of those components, but let's just for a moment assume we're looking at all of them. As long as we have those conditions, there is an offer and the offer is accepted, that's the marriage. Plain and simple. It's very, very simple. We tend to complicate things by adding other layers, other cultural layers. Of course, the nikah is followed by the walima. The walima is a sunnah in which you invite people to a meal. It's a form of celebrating the marriage. It's a form of announcing the marriage. Of course, in the marriage contract, there are witnesses. The point of the witnesses is that the contract is not done in secret, that the contract is done publicly. But the walima is a form of announcing it to the community. That's the basic marriage. Unfortunately, we have overcomplicated that by adding many different layers. What is the problem with that? This question. This question is the proof of the problem of what we've done. Now we've gotten to the point that people don't know if the kitab is the nikah, or the kitab is something like in the Arab culture and Egyptian culture, sometimes people call the nikah a khutuba, engagement. It's not an engagement, it's marriage. It's an Islamic marriage. It makes what was not permissible with the contract. So we need to understand what the Islamic principles are. I'm happy to answer the question. And we also need to temper our cultural manifestations and our cultural things. Not that all of the cultural things around marriages are, I'm not saying that they're wrong, but we overdo it and we overcomplicate it. Everything that Allah Ta'ala gives us is simple. We as Bani Insan, we tend to overcomplicate it. My husband will be camping, no access to water. We'll have to carry most of his drinking water and look for any other water sources. Can you kindly review how to do tayammum, and also any other tips that would be helpful in terms of keeping prayer when camping? He is a Shafi'i. So regardless of the madhab, if we have a situation in which we are in, like the questioner says, we're camping, so we have limited amount of water. Obviously the water is going to be used for drinking and or cooking. Let us assume that that's all the water that we can carry, meaning that there's no excess water for wudu, and there's no access to a river or a stream or a lake or something like that. So that's one of the conditions in which we would need to make the tayammum. The tayammum is simply to tap the earth once with the hands and to wipe the face, the same part of the face that we wipe during the wudu, to tap it a second time and to wipe from the fingers to the elbow on the right hand, the fingers to the elbow on the left hand. In the Maliki madhab, the Maliki understanding of the earth is a little bit more expansive. So we use that, usually we use this opinion, we give this opinion to people to make life easier. You can make the tayammum on a stone. So as long as you find a stone that's sort of in its natural environment, which should be quite easy, you can perform the tayammum on that. You can actually just carry that stone with you. If they're traveling and they're camping, of course, they would have it, depending on how long the journey is, they would be able to combine and or shorten the prayers if they are considered traveling. If they're not considered traveling, you can take the Shafi'i opinion by combining the prayers, Dhuhr and Asr, Maghrib and Isha. And I think there's a question that will come later about the combining the prayers. You probably also want to carry a compass with you, so you'll be able to find the Qibla direction during the time of prayer if you're not used to being able to look at the sun and whatnot. Okay. Somebody asked a loaded question about the Dajjal, the Mahdi, the destruction of the Kaaba, and Ya'juj wa Ma'juj, all of these signs that come at the end of the world. Now, I would like to reference people that I taught this course right before the quarantine, right before the pandemic outbreak, Signs of the Final Hour. It's on our YouTube channel. There should be a playlist either under my name or under that. I think it's 4 or 5 episodes. So I strongly urge the questioner, and of course it's accessible for everyone. But let me just summarize in general. When Gabriel came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he asked him about Islam, Iman, Ihsan, he also asked him at the end of the hadith a 4th question. He asked him about the signs of Yawm al-Qiyamah. He says, Mata sa'a, what is the hour? The Prophet ﷺ said, the one asking knows no more than the one being asked. So he said, Akhbarni an amaratiha, that explain to me or shed light on its signs. So the signs of the final hour, the signs of the end of time, the signs of the end of the world, however we phrase it, is actually 1/4 of our religion. Usually we learn about these things when we study aqidah, when we study theology, but it can be its standalone subject matter. Basically, the ulama that took this area and wrote about it, they understood that there were small signs, medium signs, and large signs. All of the small signs are signs that happened during the lifetime of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The medium signs are the signs that happened after that, until there's a special event that happens, which itself is the beginning of the major signs of the end of time. What is this event? This event is described in a hadith, a very famous hadith that is narrated in Sahih Muslim. It is called or known as the hadith of Tamim Adari, who was a famous Sahabi radiallahu anhu, or hadith Jassasa. Jassasa is like this creature figure that features in this lengthy hadith, from whence came the name of the hadith. Some of the hadith that are long, or like the hadith of Gabriel that we just mentioned, sometimes they take a name. Basically, to make a long story short, the Prophet ﷺ was talking to the Sahaba about Yawm al-Qiyamah, the end of time, the things that the questioner asked. And he said, of course, I'm paraphrasing, if you don't believe me, ask Tamim Adari. Tamim Adari will verify what I'm saying. He'll tell you a story. And then Tamim Adari goes on to narrate a story that happened to him before he became Muslim, before the advent of the Prophet ﷺ. Tamim Adari was a trader. He found himself on the sea. He got lost at sea. He was shipwrecked on an island. On this island, he met this weird creature called the Jassasa, the one who speaks or gives stories. The Jassasa creature took him inside this fortress where there was a man that was shackled, that looked very scary and very odd. This man was the Dajjal. And the Dajjal asked Tamim Adari 3 questions. He said, tell me about the dates of the city of Baysan. Are there still dates in the city of Baysan? Baysan is a city, is a Palestinian village that was occupied by the Israelis and now subsumed into the state of Israel, that no longer has any natural dates of its own. Tamim said, of course, there are dates in Baysan. We know, we trade, we get dates. He's like, and then the Dajjal said, it's not time for me to come out yet. Then he asked him a second question. He said, tell me about Lake Tiberias. Is there still water in Lake Tiberias? He said, there's still water in Lake Tiberias. So the Dajjal said, it's not time for me to come out. Then he asked him a third question. He said, tell me about Ayn Zoghar. Ayn Zoghar is an old name for the Dead Sea. Is there still water in Ayn Zoghar? He said, yes, there's still. He said, it's not time for me to come out. So based on this hadith, the ulama that talk about the signs of end of time, they said that these 3 items, when Baysan no longer has dates, when Lake Tiberias is depleted either completely or partially, which it is in decline, it has been in decline for several decades, and the Dead Sea obviously declines rapidly because there's no natural life in it. They said that when these 3 things happen, this is when the Dajjal will come. And because some of these 3 things have happened, like there's no dates in Baysan, for example, the ulama agree that we are now entering into the major signs. So the questioner asked about the Dajjal, the Mahdi, the destruction of the Kaaba, Ya'juj and Ma'juj. All of these are from the major signs. So we have now entered into this part of history. The point of the Hadith is that those are just signs. It doesn't mean that there's something inherently wrong or bad, there being no dates here or there being no water here. It's not like we need to go fill the lake up with water. That's not the idea. The Prophet ﷺ is teaching us that when this happens, this will be a sign that something else will happen. So people that study the signs of the end of time and whatnot, they also need to be very careful that the signs are simply signs, they're simply markers. Okay, so minor, middle, major signs. There is an introduction to the major signs. We are now in that. The question is that the Dajjal will come first. The Dajjal is like a trickster. He will start by saying these platitudes and these one-liners that no one will disagree with. You know, God is love, happiness is good. All these general, generic terms that no one on its face value, no one will deny any of that. So he'll start to attract people. And he will use like a Judeo-Christian paradigm in his discourse. So he will attract a lot of the people from the people of the book, and unfortunately, he will also attract a lot of Muslims. So he comes out of Persia, the Persian area, and he ends up in Jerusalem or thereabouts. And it's there that he starts to flip things. He starts to manipulate the weather. He starts to manipulate genetics. One of the hadith says he'll call somebody, he says, come in front of me. And he'll do something and he'll show this person all of his lineage, all of his past lineage and potential progeny. You know, there's something with DNA or genetics or AI or I don't know, something like that in which so people will be like, oh, that's amazing. And they'll be overcome by the awe of that, you know, more people will follow him, more people will follow him. And then he will turn. So he starts off using these one-liners that everyone kind of agrees to. And please, I'm grossly summarizing this. I mean, refer back to the 5 lectures that we had in which we discussed them in great detail. And then he'll start to flip, and then he'll start to, you know, call people to wrong and things like that. It is at that point that the Mahdi emerges. The Mahdi, his name is Muhammad, the son of Abdullah. I mean, his father is Abdullah, his name will be Muhammad, and he is from the line of Imam Hassan, alayhi salam, is a descendant of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He will emerge in Medina, people will seek him out. He'll flee to Mecca because he doesn't want anything to do with this. Everyone will go to Mecca. He'll come back to Medina. So these are some of the signs. He looks like the Prophet, alayhi salatu salam, you know, very handsome, radiant, etc. The Mahdi then will go out after everyone comes and all of, you know, the leadership structure and infrastructure of the Muslim majority world will support him. He will then, you know, take this as a sign that he is expected to do this. In other words, he doesn't seek it out. There's no, you know, Congress of electing the Mahdi and then, oh, I want to be the Mahdi. It doesn't work like that. This Allah gives dominion to whom he wants and he takes it away from whom he wants. So after all of these people and all of these Muslim world leaders, you know, basically begging him to take on this mantle, he will take on this charge. He will challenge the Dajjal and there will be fighting and there'll be great loss of life. But the Mahdi will not be able to overcome the Dajjal until Christ alayhi salam returns. So the questioner didn't ask about the second coming of Christ, but those 3 are linked: the Dajjal, the Mahdi, Christ. When Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam comes, the Dajjal, when he meets the Dajjal will simply evaporate. The hadith says the way that salt evaporates in water. He will dissolve. He will simply go away as fast as he came. So these are not necessarily, except for the fight with the Mahdi, these are not necessarily these, like, you know, global battles that, you know, sometimes people think will happen and things like that. Anyway, Isa alayhi salam will end up in Medina. He will die in Medina. He will be buried next to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Those are the only 3 of the major, Isa. After Isa will come out Ya'juj and Ma'juj. Ya'juj and Ma'juj most likely are in the current area of Armenia. Again, the dam that we find in Surah Al-Kahf that Dhul Qarnayn builds, the destruction of this dam indicates the sign that Ya'juj and Ma'juj will come out. Not that the dam is actually plugging like a hole in the wall and there are these like goblins inside the earth called Ya'juj and Ma'juj. It's just a sign. It's when this happens, when that structure crumbles or ceases to exist or is falls into ruin, that just like the Prophet ﷺ said, those three signs of Baysan, the dates of Baysan, etc. When that happens, the Ya'juj and Ma'juj people will come out. There was an Abbasid Khalifa in the past who sent a group of ulama to survey where is the Sed, where is this dam that was built by Dhul Qarnayn, and they found it and they described it. Al-Idrisi describes it in his famous book of geography, and the report that was given to the Khalifa that it's in this current area of Armenia. They will come out due to some sort of economic trouble, seeking food and water, and it will actually be their descent upon the lake of Tiberias or thereabouts that causes the complete depletion of the water of Lake Tiberias. So those four, the Dajjal, the Mahdi, the return of Christ, Ya'juj and Ma'juj, all of these, we know the sequence of all of these things, but these are not the only major signs. Unfortunately, the destruction of the Kaaba, may Allah Ta'ala protect us. The raising of the Quran, no one will know the Quran anymore. May Allah Ta'ala protect us. Nobody will be left on earth that says Allah, Allah. There'll be no believers. All of these, unbelievable great signs. We do not necessarily know the order of them or where they fall. This is the best ijtihad that we have. Okay, so that's just a summary. I've already taken up more time than I wanted to on that. But again, please see our series on the subject on the YouTube channel. Can we consume sparkling apple cider? Yes, because there's no alcohol in it. My question is about sadaqah. What is sadaqah? What are the rules of sadaqah? The person who's getting it, should they know that it is sadaqah? Can we just give the money, or can we sacrifice a goat, sheep, or any halal animal, give the meat to the poor, or can we give any household things of clothing in sadaqah? Sadaqah is charity, open-ended. There is no restriction to sadaqah. Neither is there a restriction that sadaqah is for Muslims or for non-Muslims. Sadaqah is just charity, anything in excess. It's completely different than zakah. Zakah is a article of our Sharia. It's an obligation given certain conditions. When we have excess wealth above a certain amount, a year has passed, we own the money completely. Then we give from this excess to those categories that are mentioned in Surah At-Tawbah, the Muslims in those categories, because it is a way of redistributing some of the excess wealth from those that are wealthy to those that are less fortunate, as the Prophet ﷺ said. Sadaqah is different. Sadaqah is just a form of birr, a form of piety. Allah Ta'ala over and over and over in the Quran, He commands us to do birr, He commands us to do piety, to help those that are poor, those who are needy, those who are traveling, those who need assistance, whether they be Muslim or non-Muslim, whether they be from our family or not from our family. That's sadaqah. And you don't have to tell people. I mean, if you're going to give somebody who's less fortunate support, they know that this is charity. I mean, you don't have to say it to them to make them feel bad. They already know that this is charity. You're under no obligation to say that. It could be, considered a gift to them, because we also don't want to break the heart of the poor, and we don't want to hurt their feelings or their emotions, and we want to lift them up. If Allah has lifted us up, we want to lift the people around us up. So that's sadaqah. It's just open-ended. Okay, I got an extremely lengthy question, which is like almost 2 pages long. I'm not going to read the whole thing, about intoxicants and drugs. So I read the question a couple times so I can be able to summarize it. And for the person writing the question, I apologize that I'm not going to be able to read the whole thing, because it would take probably like 10 minutes. But the bottom line is, the questioner is basing the question on the permissibility of certain types of drugs based on our prohibition on alcohol. We all know that there's a prohibition against alcohol, but then the question is, what are the prohibitions against drugs? And he brings up many points related to cannabis, also related to hallucinogenics like psychedelics, psilocybin, LSD, and mushrooms, and other types of related drugs, citing that cannabis and certain psychedelics are used by people to help in trauma, PSD, all sorts of things, which is true. That is the case. So what does Islam basically say about these type of drugs? So to make the situation easy, there are three things that you have to understand. Number one, the Prophet ﷺ forbade us from every intoxicant. Naha Rasulullah ﷺ an kulli muskirin wa mufattirin. The Prophet ﷺ forbade us from everything that intoxicates. That would be like alcohol because it intoxicates. And mufattir, a mufattir is something that makes you high. Now, there are different classes of drugs that have different effects, but that hadith for us, that's the first thing you have to keep in mind. Number two, the Prophet ﷺ said, La darar wa la dirar, there is no harm and there is no reciprocal harm. So if we are going to consume anything, use anything, ingest anything, take anything, we have to understand what potential harm it has. And number three, in general, the Sharia is extremely liberal when it comes to medicine, and the use of medicine. So there's no need for all of this. If psilocybin or mushrooms or cannabis or whatever, if they are known to cure certain ailments, which based on the stuff that I've read, the little that I've read, they do, there's nothing wrong with that. And they can be used in those cases. I mean, if you take like oxycodone and Vicodin, and that stuff is nasty. That stuff is really, really serious stuff. But we take them as, I was in surgery. I took that for almost 6 months, multiple times a day for 6 months because of the pain of the post-surgery. So I had to take it, but it's very potent. It's very dangerous. It can be addictive, but it's something that becomes ad-darurat tubih al-mahdurat, is one of the principles of the Sharia. Situations of necessity make the impermissible permissible. So if it were regulated, if there was some literature about it to document how they can help, what kind of disorders or ailments they can correct and how they can correct them, then by all means, ahlan wa sahlan, we would use them, and there would be no prohibition whatsoever. The problem with things like cannabis and psychedelics is that the people that consume them are very, very convinced and very, very biased at the efficacy and the need of those substances. And that type of, while they bring up many good points, the problem is that it's biased, and it's not the Sharia approach. The Sharia needs to look at it scientifically. Scientifically, of course, if you smoke up or if you trip acid, of course people feel good and they go on trips and they feel different and my mind's expanded. Of course, they all say that. There's no doubt about that. That's not the proof that we need. The proof that we need is some sort of organized scientific study that helps us understand what exactly is happening, what are the potential risks, and then it needs to be regulated. What the questioner doesn't mention is that people who take psychedelics and things like that, they need to take them under the care of somebody. They go to South America and they have like a shaman or somebody with them. Why? Because you're not yourself. You can, you're tripping. You're somewhere else. Who knows? You could throw yourself off a cliff for all you know, because you're not in your right set of mind. You are under the influence of that intoxication, which its default ruling is that that's haram. For the sake of it, just to do it, that's haram. So for us to say, okay, it's doable, or people can microdose, or people can use certain substances, we need to be much more scientific about it. They can use certain substances for what? When we talk about cannabis, are we talking about CBD, or are we talking about the THC component? The THC component is a psychoactive component. What are the benefits of that? There are people that talk about the benefits of CBD, but to be honest, it's very weak. It's the THC that's potent, where the real research needs to happen. There are many people that soldiers that suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, great trauma, that either turn to cannabis or different types of psychedelics, who have been cured of that. Alhamdulillah, that's great. Allah Ta'ala created these things for us to use, but to use them in a certain way. The way that the dominant culture that's pushing cannabis and psychedelics, that's not the way we would do it. We have no problem with researching it and looking at it, but we would look at it in a different way. The other thing that the questioner brings up, which is also important, are other substances like caffeine, sugar, and things like that. Caffeine doesn't intoxicate you. It doesn't take you out of your mental state. It gives you a bolt of energy. If that energy is too great, it could be haram. So again, it's not a blanket statement, but caffeine on its own is not haram. The ulama have written about coffee and all of that. Coffee is essentially a Muslim drink. It's a drink that Islam gave the world, it gives a certain amount of energy. Sugar, again, anything in excess is going to be haram. And there are certain people under certain situations, under certain health conditions that can't have any sugar and shouldn't have any sugar. So again, but the effects of something like caffeine and sugar are not like the effects of cannabis or alcohol or psychedelics and the like. Okay, I mean, I don't think I covered every single sentence, but that's more or less what the questioner wanted to ask. One thing he does say towards the end is that a lot of people, I'm assuming Muslims, that talk about these things, talk about them with misinformation and lack of education. And I agree. One of the things that we are taught is to give an Islamic ruling, a Sharia ruling on something, you must first be able to conceptualize the issue completely and understand it. This is something that I have looked into. I mean, I'm not the world expert in mushrooms, but I have looked into it a little bit and talked to people and done some research to know enough that we need more research is what I'm saying. So please remember those initial principles. Most importantly, that the Sharia is very liberal when it comes to medicine, because in the Shafi'i madhab, for example, even if the medicine contains an impure substance, you are allowed to consume it for medical purposes. So the Sharia is very liberal about that if it is, needed and if it is safe and there are no long-term negative effects and whatnot. But my point is that let us undergo the research maturely and scientifically to determine what is in and what is out. Okay. Can you please shed light on the practices of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba during warfare of treating prisoners and civilians? I was impressed by your mentioning of Hamas' relative killing of civilians not being justified. Yeah, we are not allowed to kill civilians. I mean, I can't even believe I have to say that. That's ABC of Islam. Civilians is something that is completely forbidden by the Prophet ﷺ in our rules of engagement. Our rules of engagement are very difficult. They're so difficult that one can almost conclude that it's almost impossible to have warfare like that in the modern world because of the conditions. You can't destroy parts of the environment. So, you talk about smart weapons. I mean, they got to be like genius weapons because you can't just, bomb something and, there's collateral damage. The Sharia would see that as haram. Women, children, elderly people, people that are clergy or the like of established religions. These are people that are non-combatants. We're not allowed to target them. We're not allowed to harm them. Hospitals, schools, and the like. The thing about Israel and Palestine, and people get mad, about this, is that the majority of the Muslim world has recognized, not all, but has recognized the state of Israel. The state of Israel is a recognized nation. That's why this idea when Israelis come and say, Israel has the right to exist, and that's like a non-logical statement. It exists already. It exists, and there are peace treaties and ties, and there's an Israeli embassy in Cairo and in Amman, and diplomat and vice versa. I've seen that I used to drive daily the Israeli embassy in Cairo. You see the Israeli flag in the balcony of the embassy. That means that that guy, that ambassador, his staff, his family in Egypt have been given safe passage to be in Egypt. That means it would be haram to harm them, just like it would be haram to harm the Italian ambassador and his family, because they've been given aman, their passports have been stamped, they've been allowed to come in. The Sharia recognizes these things. So just because I say that the majority or many Muslim majority countries recognize the state of Israel, that doesn't justify the occupation. It doesn't justify Israeli aggression. It doesn't justify, or it doesn't mean that we like it, or it's just a reality. It's a political reality. Therefore, based on that reality, there are going to be some Sharia implications like this. Therefore, if somebody came and asked me, are there people, Israeli citizens, that the Sharia sees as civilians? Yes, of course, because of the reasons that I just mentioned. That does not mean that we negate the right of the Palestinian people, or that the West Bank is occupied, that East Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's not the point of the question, but because you're using as an anchor what I said the other week about civilians. Anyway, more to the point about treating of prisoners and civil. We talked about civilians. Prisoners of war have to be fed, have to be attended to medically, have to, all of the type of things you would find in the Geneva Conventions of, and similar modern language, the Sharia would uphold when it comes to prisoners. In addition, the Prophet ﷺ himself personally had his own way of dealing with the prisoners, is that when he captured prisoners, he used the skills that those prisoners had to improve the status of the Sahaba. And by doing that, they earned their freedom and they were sent back, home. And here I'm referring to the Prophet ﷺ using the prisoners of Quraysh to teach the Sahaba to read and write. So when he had the Qurayshis as prisoners, those that could read and write, he said, if you teach X number of Sahabas to read and write, you've earned your freedom and you can go back. So the Prophet ﷺ went even beyond the regular Sharia conditions of care and humanitarian rights towards the prisoners of war. Torture is absolutely haram. It's so obvious. It's one of those things. It's funny that you even have to say torture is haram. Depriving them of food, light, medicine, air, sunlight, all of those type of things, that is haram. Can we combine Dhuhr and Asr, Maghrib and Isha all the time, even when we are at home, make it easy for us not to get lazy? You can, according to the opinion that I have been teaching all of you, because it is a sound opinion that is in the Shafi'i madhab. And in this country, we are a minority. This is not a Muslim majority country, which means that and this country is actually very large, unlike other European countries where, if you've ever been to a place like London, well, I only know London that well, sometimes when you're in London, you think you're in a Muslim country or a Muslim city. It's easy to find a mosque, but America and Canada is a little bit different because everything is so far away. Some people, oh yeah, I go to such and such mosque and it's 20 miles away. Those are long distances. So because of the distances and there's no place to make wudu, and now in light with COVID and those type of health restrictions, we need these kind of opinions. That's why these kind of opinions exist for people like us. So for us specifically living in North America, there's nothing wrong with continuing to do that, to combine Dhuhr and Asr in either time, Maghrib and Isha in either time. And inshallah, this is not a form of laziness, but rather this is a form of compatibility with the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, because this is what he did in Medina, as is reported in the hadith of Ibn Abbas and found in the collection of Sahih Muslim. How are we doing on time? Okay. No, there doesn't have to be a reason. So the normal ruling is that there has to be a reason. Like we're in the mosque now, if it started raining heavily, then when we prayed Maghrib, we would combine with it Isha because of the rain, or if I'm sick. But this opinion, it's for no reason. Specifically, that's the wording of the hadith that the Prophet ﷺ combined Dhuhr and Asr, Maghrib and Isha in Medina for no reason. And it is an odd opinion. It is a unique hadith. And many of the other imams did not take from this hadith and did not agree with it. But Imam Shafi'i, especially the later Shafi'is, they agreed with it. Now you know the hikmah. Why? Because of people like us. Because this situation exists in which we might need to follow it. Now, I'm not saying you have to follow this position. If you don't want to follow it, that's fine. When I'm at home, I don't follow it. I don't feel the need. But if you follow it, don't feel bad or any shame, or you're not being lazy in your deen. Your prayers are accepted, inshallah. The Shia combine, yes, all the time in this way. Correct. Because they see Dhuhr and Asr as one time slot in which you have to perform the two prayers, rather than the way we see it as two separate time slots.
So do they wait Zuhur and Asr between some from Zuhur to Asr? Do they wait to offer? Nothing.
No, they pray together. The Shia pray together.
4 rakats are Zuhur, then 4 rakats.
Yeah.
Same in that.
Same for Maghrib and Isha. My 19-year-old daughter, I feel I got this question last time. We'll answer it anyway. My 19-year-old daughter wants to know why and where in the Quran does the order come to eat dhabiha. She eats only dhabiha since she was 14, but then got diagnosed with celiac at 16. She cannot have gluten anymore. When she is with her school on tournaments and can't find halal or gluten-free, then at times she has to just have milkshakes for dinner. She is still only eating dhabiha and now old enough to figure out her way, but wants to be sure and knows what to do. Okay, the issue of the dhabiha food is that we are not allowed to eat something that is killed. حرم عليكم الميتة والدم ولحم الخنزير وما أهل به لغير الله. We are forbidden from eating that which is not slaughtered, الميتة. Of course, pig products and that which is slaughtered for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which means that we have to slaughter the animal to eat. So then the question is that the meat that we find in the local market, is it dhabiha, meaning is it slaughtered or is it not slaughtered? This is where the issue comes from. The Quran is very clear. We're not allowed to eat meat that is not slaughtered. This is where the issue comes from, or if your daughter wanting to know what does the Quran say. As far as the tasmiyah, as far as saying Allah's name over the slaughtered animal, there's a difference of opinion amongst the madhahib. Most of the madhahib say that you have to do the tasmiyah, but in the Shafi'i madhab you don't. It's considered a sunnah. So if you look at the wide sharia, as long as the animal is slaughtered, then it's fine. Then it's permissible for us to eat. We are also allowed to eat the food that is slaughtered by the people of the book, specifically the Jews and the Christians. So in our case, living here, kosher, anything that is kosher would be, well, not anything that's kosher, but meat and poultry that is kosher would be permissible for us to eat. There is another opinion, a weaker opinion, that exists within the Maliki madhab that would allow us to consume, meat and chicken in this country if it would be considered the food of Ahlul Kitab. I caution against following that opinion, as I've mentioned over many times before, because there is another component to eating halal food, which is that it affects our spiritual or our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, eat that which is halal. Atab mat'amak takun mustajab ad-du'a. Eat what is halal and Allah ta'ala will answer your prayer. Meaning that if you don't eat what is halal, then that can clog up your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in the case of, let's say your daughter, when she was a teenager in the past and she was going to these, diners, and because she has celiac disease, that would be an appropriate situation in which she could follow that weaker position because of the great hardship. She's only going to follow it once or twice while she's on the road with the team, and that's it. That's okay. But I would not make it a habit to follow this opinion. I don't follow that opinion at all. Because in the area in which we live, we have enough access to halal food. We also have enough access to kosher foods that are even, main grocery chains. So it shouldn't be. We can also just eat fish or some type of other fish option if we're out and about and whatnot. So I would take eating halal or dhabiha seriously. This is not like a cultural thing. There is a great impact for it. But also know that we have flexibility in times of need. Okay. You clarified that during wudu, one does not need to remove their socks if one had kept their socks on since the last wudu. Does the same rule apply to women's headscarf? No, because you have to wipe the head. So the woman would need to either remove the scarf or she could put her hand underneath the scarf and wipe her head. But you couldn't wipe over the scarf in lieu of wiping the head. And then right before I came, there was a question about abortion. What is the ruling on abortion? Islam allows abortion if needed up until the first 4 months because of the hadith that at 120 days, this is when the ruh, when the soul is placed into the body. So the Sharia differentiates between the vegetative state of the initial, what is it, zygote or whatever it's called, I forget the name. And then once the ruh or the soul is placed in the body, then it is considered, a human being. In cases post 120 days, an abortion can only take place if there's a dire need, and it can only take place if the physician and like the mufti consult on this. So that's like a case by case, if there's a grave situation to the mother, and there are situations like that. But before 120 days, it can be allowed. But even when I say that, it's also not to be taken lightly because, obviously it's a serious act, but it is permissible. Okay. Let's see if this works. Okay, somebody put the link to the signs of the end of time. Great. It was very eerie because we were doing that as things were closing. And I think the last class, I was just sitting here all by myself, just like looking into I'm like, this is the end. That was very weird. Anyway, but I encourage people to read it. I encourage people to watch them. Because we go through the little sketch that I just gave tonight, I gave more detail to it. What is the proper way to dispose of dead animals, birds in your yard? You can just bury them. That's fine. Oh, that's the same question twice. All right. Are there any other questions? I think we have like maybe 10 minutes.
Question on scarf. I wasn't clear. Can the rub water over the scarf or not?
Not over. She would have to, place her hand like this, just and like that.
The question I have is when you do the Atahiyat, there's a shorter version and a longer version. When is it permissible to do the shorter version? Sometimes in Juma, you do the shorter version so people can get back. What's the practice by the Imam?
You mean in the tashahhud, when we're sitting before we do salam? Well, the shorter version is the tashahhud that we say in the second rak'ah of Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, and Isha. And that's the first part of the tashahhud up until the shahada. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. And then in the last rak'ah of any prayer, we continue after that the prayer on the Prophet ﷺ. So that's the difference between when we say it and how we do it.
Sometimes during Taraweeh and even Juma, the Imam finishes very quickly. It means that is he probably doing the short version or?
No, I think maybe he's just rushing. Yeah, but after when you're sitting in the final tashahhud, even if the Imam finishes the prayer and does his salam, you can continue. Even if it's for moments, you don't have to finish exactly at the same time. So if, and maybe that's a message for me. Sometimes maybe I'm too fast, but you can continue.
The other question I have is the day of Juma, because the Quran in the Surah of Juma says you need to pray and rush back to work, right? So speak a little more about practice Juma prayer.
So the question about the Juma prayer and Surah Al-Juma saying that after we pray, we can go back to work. Basically, Juma is a ritual that can take us from Fajr of Friday up until the Juma time. Ideally, one would obviously wake up and pray Fajr and then take a bath and then arrive to the mosque early. It's an opportunity to come and, say, obviously this is extra, you don't have to do this. But then after you finish the Juma prayer, that's when you can resume your business life, I think is what Allah is saying. In other words, it's not the Sabbath where you have to take the whole day off. Nor either what I said, you can open your shop in the morning and work in the morning or see your clients in the morning and just break for Juma, which is what most people in the West do. They come to the mosque to pray. Okay, and then you can go back. And it's a way of emphasizing that Juma is not the Muslim Sabbath. In other words, it's not a day where you have to rest or have to take off. You're allowed to go back. There's nothing wrong or haram or immoral with finishing your obligation towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and then going back. But Allah says, as you go back, remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala often. Remember Allah ta'ala often. So for us, our way is that we can be in this world, but not of this world. So we can work and still remember Allah. It's not either or. And Ibn Arabi, he says in the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, he says, the strangest thing I saw when I was in Mecca is I saw an old man hanging by the curtain of the Kaaba, crying and pleading with Allah Ta'ala for dunya. And when I was in the marketplace, I saw a young man who was trading, but his tongue was constantly remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's like a story that I always like to share, because that young man, that's our model. You can be in business and do your work. There's nothing wrong with that, but your heart can be with Allah. That one does not preclude the other. Any truth to killing an insect to break wudu? No. Please repeat Brother Mohsin's question. Sorry, I just did. I'm sorry. Can one stay in sujood longer too in jama'ah? Like not too long throughout the prayer, or else you'll lag behind. You can't lag behind too long, more than two major motions. In the end, in the last sujood, you can, because there's no more prayer after that. The imam is going to do the tashahhud and do the taslim. You can still be in sujood when the imam is saying Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and your prayer will be fine. So at the end, that's fine, but try not to make it a habit. Oops, I lost the question. Try not to make it a habit throughout the prayer. Remember, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Innama al-imamu yu'tamun bih." Yu'taman bihi. The imam's job is that you follow him. That's why we have the imam of the prayer, so we follow the person leading the prayer. Well, there's quite a few of you online. It would have been nice to see everyone in the masjid. Can you please expand on why you can make wudu over the socks but not the hijab, provided both were put on when you have wudu? The dispensation for the wiping over the sock, the khuf, comes from the hadith. So there's a clear text about that. We can't wipe over any other article of clothing except the sock. Now, the head, there are different opinions in the different madhab of how much of the head needs to be wiped. The Shafi'i madhab is the most liberal. The Shafi'i say only 3 hairs. So if for example, I have my turban on, I could just go like this and wipe like that, and then that's enough. No, I didn't want to get into that, but since April brought it up, I got to get into it. So that's the way that a woman can, like say you're out and you have hijab and you're out and about, just do that. Just put your fingers up and at least grab 3 hairs. As long as your fingers are wet and they touch the 3 hairs, then for the according to Imam Shafi'i, you have wudu. I was trying to be more universal, but okay. So that will make it easy.
Can take advantage of Shafi practice. And
Yeah.
use white
Or men too. Yeah. So let's say, like me, I have my hat on and I don't know where am I going to put it? Or a woman and she has her hijab. So when you come to wiping your head, if you just tilt it back and grab 3 hairs, then that's it. Then that's enough. Is there a quick response to how the Shia derived to combine Dhuhr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha? I can't remember the verse right now, but it has to do with a verse about they see the prayer time of the day or the Dhuhr and Asr as one period of time in which to pray. There's textual evidence for that. It's not like they just made it up. But the hadith, the verse escapes me. Next time, inshallah. Can siblings, own brothers and sisters, stand next to each other and pray? No, I mean boys with the boys and the girls with the girls. That they can pray side by side if there's a gap between them, or the boys in the front and the girls in the back, but not boy, girl, boy, girl. Is there a reason why 2 lambs are required for a boy's aqiqah and 1 for a girl child? Well, it's not required, it's just a sunnah. And this is just because of the text of the hadith. There's no rational understanding that I know of that ruling. You can certainly slaughter more, for example, but the hadith talks about the 2 and the 1. How are we doing on time? What time is
6 minutes. It's 33. 33.
okay? So we just have a few more minutes left. Some argue that premarital sex is allowed in committed relationships as marriage early during Islam was a quicker ordeal. Is this valid? There is not one article or particle of truth in this sentence, whoever wrote this. Some argue that premarital sex is allowed. Zina is one of the major sins, is one of the kaba'ir. It's ma'lum min ad-din bid-darura. It's one of the necessarily known things in Islam. It has nothing to do with in the past and in the future. And the marriage contract allows what was haram to be halal, which is the sexual act. As long as there's the offer and the offer and the accepting of the offer based on the conditions, literally that can take 3 minutes, 2 minutes. Like can't be anything easier than that. So unless that happens, there can be no sexual act. Then that is considered haram. So there's no such thing as a committed relationship. These are all modern terms. There's no committed relationship. Either you're married or you're not married, or somebody's your relative. That's it. It doesn't matter. We're going steady. We're on second base. We're on third base. We're committed. Those are all modern terms. That has nothing to do with the Sharia. That has nothing to do with the Quran and the Sunnah. I don't know who asked the question. I'm just saying, if somebody's confused or something like that, just let me lay it, clean for you guys. Yeah, marriage has to happen for the sexual act to be permissible. That's the whole point of the marriage act. And that's why we celebrate it. And, because it's like the beginning of the family. Related to that is lineage. Related to the lineage is going to be matters of inheritance and matter of who you're related to and who you're not related to. All sorts of societal issues stem from marriage. Society is built from marriage. It's why we feel we have a home. What do we say? What makes a home? Where our parents are buried. what does the song say? Land where my pilgrim's pride, land where my fathers died, let freedom ring, right? But we even in America, we say that matters, where your parents are buried, where your grandparents are buried. If you don't have that type of relationship, you're not going to have any patriotism or love of protecting your home. Where does that all come from? It all comes from marriage. And I mean, this sounds old-fashioned, but it doesn't mean that it's wrong. And from the marriage comes children, and from children comes society, so on and so forth. And that's why Islam puts it's such an important thing, not just for Muslims, but for all religions. So the marriage contract for us is the vehicle, is the instrument that allows that act to take place. Before that, that act would be considered illicit. Or are people talking? I have the volume all down. Oh, somebody has their mic not muted. Okay, speak now or forever hold your peace. This is the final, we're in the final stretch now.
Juma was ordained, the rationale being that Allah wants us to congregate as opposed to praying individually.
Yes, so one of the reasons behind the legislation of Juma is that it's a way for us to congregate, to be together, and for us to hear something of benefit. Because when you pray on your own, you might not have that dose of, somebody reminding you of something. So instead of praying the four, we could have prayed the 4 rakahs together. That could have been Juma, but no, Allah also took away 2 rakahs and gave us the khutbah in lieu of those 2 rakahs so that we can hear something, which is why the role of the khatib, it's so important that the khatib, has a tall task, tall order, which is to say something to motivate people, to admonish them, to remind them, and so on. And so one of the wisdoms behind the Juma prayer is that we congregate. That's one, so we can come together as a community. And number 2 is that we can also listen to something that is of benefit. Once you get that dose, Allah says, okay, you can go back and you can go back to your trading. Can you expand on how many candidates one can speak to at a time when considering marriage? Well, until there is an agreement that you guys are going to get married, you're searching so you can speak. But once there is some kind of commitment, verbal, and different cultures do it differently. Sometimes people, they're like, oh, let's recite the Fatiha together, and we all recite the Fatiha. Khalas, that means that you are now taking the steps. That's the engagement. You are now taking the steps towards marriage. You're not going to go talk to somebody else. So communication is very important, and because these things are very sensitive, and because as parents, we always want what's best for our kids, sometimes we mess up by not communicating. So all of the problems can be mitigated by just very clear communication. Let me think about it. It's very different than, mashallah, let's recite the Fatiha, right? Recite the Fatiha, that means we're beginning something together. So until there is that type of commitment that we are going to begin the process, you can talk and you can entertain suitors and whatnot. After that commitment, then you got to see that commitment through, either inshallah to success, or it just doesn't work out and then you part ways. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. We'll see you guys Friday, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.